Hey Snapchat, I thought I'd get in a quick snapstorm before the 4th of July weekend craziness begins. When I first look at funding an early stage company, I'm looking at 70% team and the balance is product or market. Sometimes people don't believe me, they think I'm exaggerating, but let me tell you why team is so important. A whole lot of things are going to change after you start. If you're not onto a good idea, it doesn't matter anyways. But if you're onto a good idea, then after you launch, other tech firms are going to try to copy you. After you launch, incumbents are going to try to attack you. And after you launch, many other teams are going to get funded. If you're onto a good idea, globally, information is available all at the same time. So it's no big surprise that after Airbnb started to succeed, there were several Airbnb for dogs right away. What shit happens? A competition, changes to the funding environment, maybe VC dries up, maybe you have a PR disaster or staff departure. Just today, I noticed that the founder of Hyperloop left. That's really not an uncommon thing to happen in a startup. Maybe you're struggling with monetization. Maybe you're struggling with how customers are seeing you. Great teams rise to adversity. But as I've said many times, I think the co-founder, sacred cow of Silicon Valley, is overhyped. Yes, we know about Larry and Sergey and Chad and Steve, and of course we know about David and Jerry, but the fact is that way more teams fight and way more teams fail than the positive narrative you hear about. And 50-50 co-founderships leave you with instability in decision making. I know your startup had 2 founders, maybe 3. They all do, so don't feel like I'm attacking you, but just be thoughtful. On your next company, I always tell people, hire your co-founders. Because the reality is, over time, founding teams fight. You found a team with someone you just don't know all that well. Even when you do know them well, life circumstances change. Some people get bored. Some people can't handle the stress. Some people don't want risk. The reality is there's a huge premium for taking the first leap. First-time entrepreneurs don't like to leap on their own because somehow they feel the insecurity of telling everybody that they've made this risk. If you have 3 co-founders, if you have 4 co-founders, you've given up between 2/3 to 75% of the company before you've even started. When I tell people to hire their co-founders, I'm not saying don't be generous. What you can do is you can take 50% of your company if you really want meaningful stakes and divide it up between 3 key hires. But if you fall out of love, you have one key thing that you otherwise wouldn't. You have an easy prenup. The more the co-founders, the more the pie you've given away. And people fight me for every 1% extra ownership, but you'll give 2/3 before you start. VCs always talk about wanting to fund teams, and they express it as co-founders, but I think most VCs actually mean something different. What they mean is they don't want a single point of failure. They don't want to know that it's just one founder who owns 90% of a business. But here's the thing. As long as you're generous with your equity, as long as you share liberally with the early people you hire, and as long as when you raise from VCs, you have a strong and committed team, people will fund solo co-founders. And what I always tell people, be very liberal with your early employees, allowing themselves to call themselves co-founders. It costs you nothing to allow them to call themselves co-founders, and it means the world to them and to their careers. I see a lot of founders fight over this co-founder status. To me, it's so silly. So how do you build your early stage team? I want to talk about getting from seed to A. My ideal configuration is a CEO, a CTO or senior architect, and a bunch of engineers and nobody else. Maybe you've got a head of product, or maybe you hired an early junior marketer, but here's the thing. In the earliest days, it's about building product, and having people who are not focused on building product is both a cost and a distraction. My biggest pet peeves: do not outsource your tech development. Don't have a consulting firm build your core product, and don't have a ton of business people before product's complete. You would never open a gourmet restaurant and outsource your kitchen staff or outsource your menu development. If you outsource your tech, you simply do not have the right DNA to build a valuable internet startup company. At my first company, I hired a bunch of people who looked just like me. And of course, I don't mean literally like me, but my friend Seth Sternberg once said, short people hire short people. Let that be a lesson for you. If you're deeply introverted, you might want to hire extroverted people. If you are not a completer finisher, you might want to hire someone with OCD. In my personal opinion, the most underrated skill at a startup is product management. Most engineers think they make great product managers, which is why a lot of early stage or high growth companies don't value product management enough. Product management is about understanding customer requirements. It's about looking at the trade-off of functionality and features. It's also about understanding the competition, understanding how to price products, understanding how to structure products. Many investors will tell you to bring in experienced teams early. Don't. Most investors find security in fancy resumes, and that's because most investors don't have real operating experience. When you bring in super senior people, they need bigger budgets. They don't like to carry their own bags. They don't like to do the work. And the very first bump in the road, they're out of there. Of course, no rule is 100%. I would never rule someone out just because they're experienced, but be thoughtful about the impact on your culture. If you're going to hire someone super experienced, make sure they just have startups in their bones. What you really want to do is hire people who punch above their weight class. Hire the senior director of engineering who wanted to be VP of engineering. Hire the director of sales who wanted to be head of sales. They'll always have more to prove. They'll always have more of a chip on their shoulder, and they'll always be more grateful. The first sales to customers are more like consulting projects. They're consultative, not relationship. Super senior salespeople need product market fit before they can ramp. On sales teams, you don't want to hire super experienced relationship managers. You want to hire evangelical salespeople. Many people at startups confuse who should be on the technology team. I'm going to describe 3 important roles to you. On the y-axis, I have process orientation. On the x-axis, I have technical capability. The person who's super technical but not process oriented is your CTO or your chief architect. They don't want to deal with employee drama. They don't want to deal with Gantt charts and planning and all that boring shit. They just want to be super technical. Your VP of engineering has way more process orientation. Those are your planners. And most great startups have both of them. If the CTO is not senior enough, they can be chief architect. But don't confuse super technical with management. That's like asking a super creative director on a movie to suddenly have to deal with fundraising and process management and where to do shoots. And then there's the super planners, which are program managers. This is when your company's a little bit bigger and you have time for a full-time planner. When you get bigger, this role is critical. One of the dead giveaways of a company I will not fund in the early days is companies with too many C's. If you have less than 10 people and a CEO and a COO and a president and a CFO and a CTO, what it tells me is that you lack strong leadership. Here's why. When you have 3 people starting a company and you can't have the hard discussions about what is your role versus my role, you fudge. So you say, I'll be the CEO, you be the president, or I'll be the chairman, you be the CEO. In my book, it's an automatic disqualifier because I know you fudge decisions and I don't back people who fudge. What I recommend is functional responsibility. Help divide the work and make people accountable. Of course, a CEO has a VP of engineering, a VP of product, of sales, of marketing, of finance, of business development. If you have someone who doesn't easily fit into one of these roles, who's just a co-founder, sayonara. All right, next time I pick up, I'm going to talk about what to do when you go from an A round to a B round. I call it leveling up.